Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Hope the week is going well. Let me start with Aurelia, who's asking euro dollar, which is up 23 ticks. Is it going to be up 100 or down 100 after Draghi? Because Draghi, of course, is speaking today. Mario Draghi, Super Mario. 105 stocks suddenly jumped at 12:05 and 38 seconds. 46 of those moved 1% or more. Each line is one stock. This is Eric Unseda, and giving us a flavor of the market movements. China FX reserves fall to $3.19 trillion, the lowest since 2011. Drop of 15.89 billion in August was the biggest since May. Home thoughts. I've met many people, some who are very well-to-do, very unhappy. I've met people who apparently have nothing and are extremely happy. And therefore, my conclusion is that's all to do with the mindset. I like this photograph of Obama sipping his coconut in Laos, and thank you to Hervé for tweeting that. I must say, I really like coconut water. It really is therapeutic, actually. If you can't talk well to yourself, who can you talk to? This is William Gass in the Paris Review. War and poverty have forced 50 million children around the world from their homes. It's just so unbelievably sad. It's incredible. These are the real refugees in our world today, these children without their parents, forced from their homes. Days after a slur, Obama spoke briefly with the president of the Philippines. Have a look at the photograph. And then look at this photograph, front page of the South China Morning Post, caption, suggestions. This is David Inglis. Philippine stocks fell for the 11th time in 12 sessions. The peso dropped 2, both the worst in Asia this Thursday. Jinping has committed fraud, Bongo said in a separate interview with Europe 1 Radio on Wednesday. I didn't organize anything. I didn't put in place a network of cyber criminals in order to rig the vote, he said. Asked whether he would accept the court's ruling if it did examine the results, he said, I am a Democrat. I am in favor of the Constitutional Court taking up the case and may it confirm my election. That's what I am expecting. Gabon's President Ali Bongo, re-elected opposition, rejects results. And it's clear that there was a lot of chicanery in this instance, but it's not clear to me how anyone can compel an outcome which is going to go in favor of the opposition. Opinion taking China as bullseye, US rebalance scheme doomed. This is in Xinhua News. Time to reflect on the US rebalance strategy. As President Obama attends his last East Asia summit here Thursday, it is high time that Washington conducted some serious soul-searching over the outgoing administration's signature pivot to Asia policy. Unlike many of his predecessors who were inclined to take adventures in the Middle East, Obama dubbed himself the United States' first Pacific president and has chosen to entrench and expand the US presence in Asia. It is an open secret that China, a large country with steadily increasing national strength and international influence, is the bullseye. The Obama administration has never said that, but it is trying to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea that far exceeds Seoul's security needs, and its hand is behind the South China Sea arbitration farce staged by the former Philippine government. The self-command of most Asian countries is just part of the reason why Washington's enthrallment spell is losing its power. Besides, that is the increasing difficulty for the United States to put the pieces together and pull off the trick. On the other hand, the military pillar remains a plan. The Pentagon once declared that it would transfer 60% of US Air Force and Navy assets to the Asia Pacific, saying intentions aside, cross-the-board budget cuts and unfinished messes in the Middle East have made it mired and hamstrung. If it truly wants a peaceful and prosperous Asia Pacific, then it is time for the United States to come up with a new playbook, as well as an epitaph for the pivot policy. Take you back to the 2nd of December 2013 when I spoke about how the pivot to Asia was bearing its fangs, and I said I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre. I said the US probably feels it has a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. I spoke about the blinding attack and the distant blockade operations. That's the interesting component. A blinding attack really is a situation of all-out war, and I think both sides are not going to be keen on that. But these distant blockade operations are key. China's dependence on foreign oil is increasing, just as the US's dependency is decreasing, and interestingly, given my belief that the eastern seaboard is a fabulous energy prize that puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into the geopolitical frame. If you're considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be sold into Asia in the future. And on the 28th of August in my piece about TCAD in Japan, I said, and if you think about it, the Indian Ocean is an appendage of the South China Sea. Japan bears the responsibility of fostering the confluence of the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, said the Prime Minister. So I said I do foresee Japan alongside the US and India seeking to contain and triangulate China in the Indian Ocean. I said another issue post-Fukushima is Japan's energy security. Here too I expect Japan to seek a serious foothold in the nascent East African energy supplies which run from Mozambique through Tanzania up to Kenya and inland. Japan's energy security is a key issue. Interestingly, if you look at the Japanese investments, they are concentrated in energy, ports, logistics, and what I would call the choke points. On that note, let me put up a photo of Ali the navigator who navigated us to Wasini Island. Pictures released by the Philippines allegedly show Chinese ships and barges at the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. Sky News tweeted a Russian fighter jet came within 10 feet of a US spy plane over the Black Sea. Trump, in an event with Clinton, says Putin is a better leader than Obama. I think under the leadership of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the generals have been reduced to rubble. They've been reduced to a point that's embarrassing for our country, he says. Trump said at NBC's Commander-in-Chief Forum in New York, attended by military veterans. It was the first time Trump and Clinton had squared off on the same stage since accepting their party's presidential nomination in July for the November the 8th election. Finally, leave you with one quote: the political kaleidoscope in Syria changes, but looking through it, the prospect is still for more war. International markets, Liberty Media is paying $4.4 billion to take over Formula One. That's probably a good buy, I would have thought. I was featured in an interview by Xinhua about the G20. Of course, they practiced some censorship and they took very positive remarks I made. JGBs have lost 1.2% from the end of July, the most among 26 sovereign debt markets tracked by Bloomberg. The benchmark note suffered its worst month in August since December of 2013. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro, dollar, 112.57. The big event today is Mario Draghi. Dollar index, 94.85. Japanese yen, 101.55. Second quarter final GDP grew by 0.2% versus an estimate of 0%. Annualized quarter-on-quarter plus 0.7%. Swiss franc 0.9685. The pound, which softened up yesterday from above 134, is now at 133.53. I'm bullish the pound. The Aussie has also been on a bit of a roll, 0.7717, so that's pushing on as well. India rupee 66.465, South Korean won 1093.72, Brazilian real 319.21, Egyptian pound 8.8774, but of course that's way out of sync with the black market rate, and the South African rand, which rallied strongly over the last 2 sessions, is now at 1402. Dollar index, I'll put up a long-term chart. You'll see that we've been trading in this band, and that's why 93, the level I keep mentioning, is pretty important. You break that and then you've sort of broken through the channel. Sterling, 133.55. I think you buy on reverses for a move to 140. Germany's DAX closed at the highest level since December, propelled by ECB balance sheet expansion, no doubt. Tech has really taken over. World's 5 largest by value. Apple, $583 billion. Alphabet, $545 billion. Microsoft, $449 billion. Facebook, $376 billion. And Amazon, $371 billion. I like this from Russian market. What would Steve Jobs say? This is a big controversy about the earplugs. Commodity markets, great story in business about how Glencore's roller coaster ride tamed its swashbuckling CEO. This is Ivan Glasenberg and his band of traders ran the commodities behemoth with swagger. 2015's plunging metal prices and company stock forced them to enact a rescue plan that's still playing out. 59-year-old CEO has a reputation as the shrewdest, boldest leader in his industry, not just the proverbial smartest guy in the room, but in the entire world of copper, coal, oil, aluminium, and wheat. On that Sunday last year, Glasenberg led a company with about $170 billion in annual revenue, 160,000 employees, and a market value of $26 billion. With operations on 6 continents, Glencore supplies grains for breakfast cereal, cotton for t-shirts, power for homes, and copper for pipe and electrical wires. Glasenberg is the guy whose company once goaded Russia into capping its wheat exports, then made a bundle on futures positions secured before the price rose. The guy who bought up coal mines in the early 1990s when nobody else wanted them, made billions later as demand in developing countries surged, the one who sought the 10 billion stock offering that made Glencore a public company, and himself a paper billionaire in 2011. What follows is the account of how Glencore sought to maneuver its way out of its worst crisis ever, based on interviews and conversations with more than a dozen people, including company executives. It's possible that no one outside the realm of commodities trading had heard of Glencore before President Clinton's final day in office in 2001. Clinton touched off a political storm by granting a pardon to one of his more controversial donors, the man who effectively created Glencore, Marc. He fled the US in 1983 after being charged with tax evasion and illegal dealings with Iran. David Herro, Chief Investment Officer for Harris Associates in Chicago, which owns about $2 billion of Glencore stock, calls Glasenberg a positive outlier. So many of these guys are poseurs. He's not a poseur. And then it's a tremendous story, well worth reading, very much in depth, takes you through all the detail, the rescue, the turnaround. Still not out of the woods yet, but let's see how it gets on. Glencore's a different company than it was a year ago. A bit less swashbuckling band of traders, a little more plain vanilla mining company. As for Glasenberg, Herro says he's less angry, more confident. Let me put up a photograph of Glasenberg and another one of Marc from 1990. Commodity markets, let's have a look at gold, 1347, big rally. Of course, held above that key level I'd been talking about, around the 1304 level, and promptly rallied. Crude oil up, US crude $46.66 up big. There was a big draw announced yesterday. If that's confirmed in today's data, then we should see a move up to maybe even $50. Pay heed to the butterfly effect of the Putin-Salvan oil deal in Hangzhou, says MK Badrakumar. The Russia-Saudi bonding in Hangzhou seems a tactical congruence to keep oil prices stable. Their energy alliance holds implications for Western economic recovery, which is critically linked to oil prices. In strategic terms, Washington's attempt to isolate Moscow is rendered ineffective because of Europe's heavy dependence on Russia for energy supplies. Clearly, Russia has outmaneuvered the US on the Middle Eastern chessboard. This is Badra Kumar. In the early 60s, when Edward Lorenz, the late mathematician and meteorologist at MIT, observed during experiments of his weather model that small, seemingly inconsequential causes could cause a significantly different outcome for aptly describing the phenomenon, he picked the metaphorical example of the details of a hurricane being influenced by minor perturbations, such as the flapping of the wings of a distant butterfly several weeks earlier. Thus was born the tantalizing butterfly effect in chaos theory, the concept that small causes can have large effects, or conversely, that dynamical systems are highly sensitive to initial conditions. How far Russian President Vladimir Putin and Saudi Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman worked toward a butterfly effect when they got together on Sunday in Hangzhou on the sidelines of the G20 summit, time only will reveal. But the high probability is that they understood the flapping of their emergent strategic partnership in the energy sector could trigger a tornado in the geopolitics of the Middle East. Interesting opinion. On the 1st of August, I wrote about how emerging markets were making a comeback. They continue to make progress, seen in the dollar rand, for example. I like this photograph from the Ministry of East African Affairs, Rwanda. East African Community Heads of State meet in Dar es Salaam today for the 17th Extraordinary Summit. Small is better in Africa's economies as biggest nations stumble. East African nations are playing an increasing role in driving growth in the world's poorest continent as they ride a wave of cheap oil, slowing inflation and lower interest rates. Left behind, former powerhouses Nigeria and South Africa. The economies of Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda are all set to expand more than 5% this year. The IMF projects Nigeria, which has power outages, weak crude oil prices and mismanagement, faces a 1.8% contraction. South Africa is set to stagnate, though recent data was a little bit better than stagnation. The bad news for commodities producers has been a boon for East Africa, which has done better at developing agriculture and manufacturing industries. Low prices of energy and other inputs also have helped contain inflation and interest rates, in turn shoring up consumer spending. The region is also reaping the benefits of an improved regulatory regime and increased investment in transport links and telecommunications. East African nations and other oil importers have largely been insulated from the slump being experienced by the big commodity producers, said Stuart Culverhouse, chief economist at Exotics. Growth spurt is visible in Kenya. Government is spending $3.2 billion on a rail link between the two main cities, and the same amount on paving 10,000 kilometers of roads by 2020. Nairobi, the traffic-choked capital, is a giant construction site, the value of approved buildings surging 41% in the first 5 months of the year. It's pretty incredible. The narrative of 6% growth as far as the eye can see in Africa is the new China is dead or at least dying, but it was always a bit overblown, he said. At the end of the day, Africa is still huge, has a growing population and massive natural resources. There will always be opportunities. FDI to Africa fell to $71.3 billion last year, down from $88.5 billion in 2014. I wrote about this in February of this year when I said Kenya and East Africa on the up as the rest of sub-Saharan Africa slumps. Have a look at this chart of 2015 GDP per capita in current US dollars for African countries. Interesting tweet from World Bank: with 1 billion urban residents forecast by 2040, cities hold the key to Africa's future. Have a look at this comparison between Bangkok and Dar es Salaam, why sprawling cities are a concern for Africa's urban future. South African all shares up 5.45% this year. Dollar rand, last time I looked, 14.02, so it's strengthened. Let's say we can hold, or whether President Zuma throws a curveball. Egyptian EGX 30 is up 16.27% this year. The Nigeria all shares down 3.91% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is down 10.07% this year. Zimbabwe's court says the ban on protests is invalid and suspends it for 7 days. Zimbabwe's High Court struck down on Wednesday a 2-week ban on public protests issued by the police, a ruling hailed as a brave stand by the courts in the face of threats to the judiciary from President Robert Mugabe. Very interesting piece in the Sydney Morning Herald, not so risky business in Congo as Australians embroiled in offshore bribe claims. Sundance's adventure in the Republic of the Congo has been profoundly ill-starred. It hit the headlines 4 years after the events detailed here, when the company's entire board, including well-known businessman Ken Talbot, plunged to their deaths in a light plane while travelling in the Congo. Talbot was at the time facing corruption charges after he allegedly bribed then Queensland Minister Gordon Nutgall. From the sky, Congo's deep green jungles and wide snaking rivers call to mind a lost paradise, but walk among the slums of Brazzaville and the illusion is laid bare. This is no paradise. The Republic of the Congo is simply lost. There's a whole story about what happened, network of buddies extended over the border into Congo. President's son was involved. I'll put up a photograph of the president, President Denis Sassou Nguesso, and also of the Cobra rebels who are loyal to him as they man a roadblock on a street in Brazzaville. Men speak as they sit in the empty Mirar market in Mogadishu. This is the spat about cat, which is sent from Kenya. I don't know if you've been following it, but one of our governors stepped into quite a political argument, basically saying that he would support Somaliland's bid for independence if they sorted out the cat imports, and that's not gone down very well since Somalia has now banned them. Kenyan lenders push central bank to clarify rate cap law. Kenyan lenders are seeking clarification from the central bank about which base rate they should use when determining loan costs and may be forced to lower rates further if they're advised the one they're already using is incorrect, an industry lobby group has said. Banks last week began cutting the cost of loans to a maximum of 14.5%. This is after President Kenyatta signed a law setting commercial lending rates at no more than 4 percentage points above the central bank base rate. 2 weeks later, lenders are still unclear whether that refers to the central bank rate, currently at 10.5%, or the Kenya Bank's reference rate, which is at 8.9%. And this was queried by Lamine Manjang, who's the chairman of the Kenya Bankers Association. We use the CBR whilst we wait for that clarification, he said. In absence of specification, the banks have applied the CBR. We will have to adjust once there is that clarity. The central bank declined to comment when contacted on Tuesday. In a statement on its Twitter account, the bank said the KBRR is the base rate for lending by commercial banks and microfinance banks as well for pricing mortgage products. The central bank later said on Twitter that the post was an error and apologized for any inconveniences caused by it. Banks are more or less being proactive as we wait clarity, said Habil Alaka. When the rate is clarified, they can do the necessary adjustments. While the amendment to the Banking Act probably refers to the CBR and not to the KBRR, the new law is unclear. Sonal Sejpal, a director at Anjawala and Kana Advocates, said in an advisory note sent to its banking clients on September 5, there is nothing in the Act that suggests it should be CBR and not KBRR or vice versa, and the ambiguity should be clarified. This is necessary even though the central bank has not announced that banks should be referring to KBRR, not CBR. In addition, the cap is not clearly stated in the new law because there are words missing, meaning the amended act can be interpreted in 3 ways, Sejpal said. The Government Gazette, published on September 1, sets the maximum interest rate that can be charged for a credit facility in Kenya at no more than 4%, the base rate set and published by the central bank. That could mean that banks charge no more than 4% above the CBR, no more than 4% of the CBR, or no more than 4 percentage points above the CBR. Banks have adopted the third interpretation. I said to Bloomberg when I was in Mount Kenya, we're still in this period of ambiguity and a lack of clarity. My impression remains that this was a populist decision. I suspect the government wants to send a very strong message, and there is still more negotiation to come around how to implement this properly. Volkswagen is targeting East Africa with a Kenya car assembly plant. That's got to be good news. They assembled cars in Kenya in the 1960s and 1970s, quite a long time ago. Then I came across an article, Telon Futures, I don't know who they are, but he's talking about how the Facebook founder wants to buy M-Pesa in one of Africa's largest buyouts. That would indeed be an interesting development. Kenya shilling 101.30, Nairobi all share down 10.26% this year, but it's had two up sessions, last two trading sessions. Kenya Airways' board is to share its recovery plan with shareholders. NSE 20 down 21.58% in 2016 and about 40 points, or just over 1% above its multi-year low hit on the 30th of August. And then finally, Trans-Century has had a miraculous rebound of 82.22% since the 26th of August, and that's all because of their investor paying way over the odds for the shares. 548% premium, and that got everyone thinking. It's a pleasure. Thank you for stopping by. Sorry I was a bit verbose, but really is a pleasure.